These series of videos are demonstrating how to automate economic policy through code. A link to the GitHub repository is included in the video description. In the previous video, we learned how to record a seller's asking price by creating a transaction request with the request create service. We also learned how to develop it. In this video, we're repeating the agenda of testing a request, explaining how the code produces the response, and sharing the development commands for the request approve service, which in this demo records the bid price from the buyer. But whether bid or ask is first is irrelevant. Buyers are welcome to lead with a bid to the request create service. Okay, we'll start with a brief tour of recent developer experience changes. As of May 2023, local development in a dev container is now available. This is in contrast to development from a dev container accessed through a browser. To start a dev container locally, Command-Shift-P and type reopen in container. Now select it from the list to reopen your editor with a development environment running from a container. Also, inside the dev container, only Postgres is run in Docker Compose. To expedite development, everything else runs inside the dev container with it as the host. Alright, if you're creating a dev container and not just restarting one, make start is run for you after the container is done building, which means the services and the client are started for you, and will restart for you when you change code. This dev container was built before, and it's been shut down since then, so we'll start the apps now. Run make start. Postgres is run in Compose, then the client and 9 services are started locally. Compiling that Rust rule service may take a while if you're building and not just restarting. The shell then begins tailing the shared no-hub log file in project root. Open another shell and run make list pids to print a home-baked list of stack-related processes. There's your stack running in watch mode. Select the Ports tab in the Editor's panel to view their ports. Open the client in a browser and sign in with Jacob Web without a password. There's the Jacob Web balance. Now open GraphQL in a browser. You can test a request from the graphical playground by copying the query and variables from the in-editor HTTP client. Open the Collections tab, then GraphQL, then Balance. Copy the query, paste it in the playground. Copy the variables, paste. Now hit the playground's query button. There's your response. Now that we know we have our front and back end running with only Postgres and Docker Compose, let's test how quickly an app restarts from a code change. Open, for example, request create, and show the terminal tailing the log. Add code. The service quickly restarts for you. Okay, no Compose services to rebuild. That speeds things up. Now let's move on to request approve. Back to the in-editor HTTP client under Collections, GraphQL. First select the Create Request entry and hit the Send button. Notice Request Create responded with a transaction request. The ID of the transaction request is 3. The total price is $21.80. And you can see creditor approval times are added, but not debitor approval times. If you haven't seen this before, watch the previous 2 videos, then come back. Okay, the debitor approval for this transaction request with ID of 3 is pending. Open the Approve Request Collection entry in your in-editor HTTP client. and note the values in the GraphQL query variables. This object is saying, I'm Jacob Webb, and where my Jacob Webb account appears as a debitor, I'm repeating the prices measured in the transaction request with a transaction ID of 3, or approve. Now hit the send button. Pull out the request and response into their own tabs, and open the request approve code, which is located under Services, Request Approve, Command, and main.go. Okay, let's get to it. Scroll down to the main function. Again, a web server router is created, then 2 routes. The first route tells Lambda the service is ready to receive a request. The second route calls this handleEvent function with the request approval decoded into a value of this request approved type. Same as the previous video, the Go type for request approve is available from project root, package, types, and request response Go. Request approve embeds an auth account and defines fields for the ID, account name, and account role in the request. handleEvent returns the response. The web server sends the response back to the user through GraphQL, and the router is attached to the web server and started. On to handleEvent. When handleEvent is past the request approve event, identified as E, some field values are tested. handleEvent connects to Postgres, creates a service with that connection to query transaction requests. handleEvent then fetches the transaction request from the database using the ID forwarded by GraphQL. Tests if the transaction request was previously approved, and if the approval is pending, handleEvent creates the service to approve the transaction request, then approves it. We know how this function works. We've seen it in the request create and services videos. Okay, the approve all role account Postgres function it calls adds a debitor approval time to the request, and debitor approval times are added to the transaction items. There's an equilibrium time, so all approvals are in. Let's test the effect of this transaction to account balances involved. Jacob Webb is down by 21.8. Grocery store is up by 20. And the state of California is up by 1.8. Fantastic, value is conserved. Recording 0 changes in value with respect to ownership is natural when modeling transactions as a change in ownership of value with respect to time. No one loses when calculus is reffing the game. Now, while showing how to set the conditions and reduce to a minimal sequence the steps required to host the natural mechanics of a free market, the case demonstrated here also scales their throughput. We started by recording the ask price, but not just from one seller. System accounting recorded the seller's ask price and approval time. System accounting also recorded a seller's stakeholder ask price and approval time using transaction automation. And finally, system accounting recorded the bid price. The debitor, or Jacob Webb, called the request approve service. And the request approve service added an approval to all transaction items where the Jacob Webb account appeared as a debitor. Now, when the value independently measured by the seller equals the value independently measured by the buyer, we have a W, which is a transaction in a free market. And when multiple participants receive their due in a single transaction, you may add friction-free, to that scaled free market transaction. Okay, not 0. System accounting charges the transaction author a 10th penny for the service of structuring transactions according to natural physical law, which protects them from governments attempting to pretend their credibility and the credibility of their chartered lending businesses by violating this law. Okay, let's clean up. Open a terminal and make stop. Command-Shift-P to open the editor's command palette. Type reopen folder locally and hit enter to reopen the project in your local OS. In the next video, it's client time. You may subscribe, share, and contribute from the buttons and links in the description.